I know what's wrong with it. The kid said it quietly. No tools in his hands, no patch on his back. Just a 19-year-old nobody standing in front of the most expensive, most cursed, most heartbreaking machine any of them had ever seen, and every single man in that compound went completely still. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this all the way to the end, because what happens next will stay with you. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Nevada desert doesn't forgive weakness. It never has. Out there 70 miles from anything resembling civilization, where the highway disappears into cracked earth and the horizon shimmers like a broken promise, the Iron Brotherhood compound sat behind chain link and barbed wire like a fortress that had survived 100 wars. And it had. Not the kind of wars fought in foreign countries with uniforms and medals. The kind fought in back rooms, in hospital waiting rooms, in the spaces between what a man says and what he means. This was a place built on loyalty, on brotherhood, on the understanding that the man riding next to you would die before he let you fall. And for 3 years, something inside that compound had been dying slowly, loudly, and without mercy. The Black Seraph. Even saying the name felt like a prayer that had gone unanswered too many times. It sat in the center of the main garage like a monument to something no one could quite define. $2.52 million of custom engineering chrome titanium alloy, hand-stitched leather, and mechanical genius. Every inch of it had been conceived, designed, and largely built by one man, a man who had disappeared off the face of the earth 6 years ago, leaving behind nothing but rumors, grief in this machine. The bike was supposed to carry the Brotherhood on what they called the Remembrance Ride. 700 bikers, families lining the roads, a tribute to the brothers who hadn't made it, the ones buried in the ground, the ones still being buried in bottles, the ones who woke up at 3 a.m. with their hands shaking and couldn't explain why. The Black Seraph was supposed to lead that ride. Instead, for 3 years, it had been destroying itself and taking pieces of the Brotherhood's soul with it every single time. The pattern was always the same. Always. A mechanic, sometimes one of the best in the country, would be brought in. They'd run diagnostics, they'd rebuild parts, they'd test the fuel system, the ignition, the timing. They'd stand back with their hands on their hips and say with full confidence, "I've got it." Then they'd fire up the engine. It would start perfectly. Every time. The kind of start that made grown men close their eyes with relief, that made the whole room exhale. Smooth, powerful, almost musical. And then the clock would start. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10, 14, 15, 16, 17. On the 17th second, the engine would go from that low, perfect rumble to something that didn't sound mechanical at all. It sounded almost human, like something screaming from inside a metal chest. A shriek of bearings and pressure and heat that went from 0 to catastrophic in a fraction of a second. And then silence. Complete, total, devastating silence. 73 mechanics over 3 years. Each one convinced they'd cracked it. Each one walking out of that garage quieter than they'd walked in. 2 of them people said never took another job after that. One had a breakdown in a Tucson diner 6 months later and couldn't stop talking about the 17 seconds. His wife had called the compound furious and terrified, asking what they'd done to her husband. Grizzly Kane had no answer for her. He never did. Grizzly Kane was the kind of man that history makes once and then loses the pattern for. 61 years old, a Deadwood. A jaw that looked like it had been carved with something blunt and angry. He'd served 2 tours in the Marines before he ever touched a motorcycle, and after that, the Brotherhood became the only country he'd pledged allegiance to. He'd been president for 19 years. He'd buried 11 brothers personally. He'd negotiated truces that prevented bloodshed, and he'd started conflicts when bloodshed was the only honest answer. But 3 years of watching that bike kill every man who tried to save it had done something to him that war and loss and grief hadn't managed to do. It had made him desperate. That morning, 5 days before the Remembrance Ride, he was standing in the garage with his arms crossed, watching the newest man circle the Black Seraph. A diagnostic specialist from Phoenix, reputation like a freight train, rates that could fund a small country. The man crouched near the engine housing, ran his fingers along a seam, shook his head slowly. "I need to say something I've never said to a client," he told Grizzly. Grizzly's jaw tightened. "Say it." This bike should work. Everything I'm looking at, fuel delivery, ignition, timing, bearing tolerance, exhaust flow. It's all correct. Better than correct. Whoever built this machine was operating at a level I don't think any of us fully understand. But something is actively destroying it from the inside 17 seconds in, and I cannot find it. He stood up and looked Grizzly in the eye. I think you need to accept the possibility that this bike cannot be fixed. The garage was dead quiet. Grizzly looked at this man for a long time, long enough that the specialist started to shift his weight slightly, one foot to the other. Thank you for your time, Grizzly said. His voice was completely flat. Accounting will wire you by end of day. The specialist nodded, picked up his kit, and walked out. Grizzly put one hand on the tank of the Black Seraph and didn't say anything for a full minute. Around him, 3 Brotherhood members stood in silence because they'd learned that this was what you did when Grizzly needed a minute. Then Dozer, real name, Dennis Briggs. 300 pounds of quiet loyalty, said softly, 5 days, Grizzly. I know how many days we have, Dozer. The guys are talking. Some of them are saying maybe we delay the ride. We're not delaying the ride. Grizzly's hand pressed harder on the tank. Eli built this machine for the remembrance ride. That was the plan. That was always the plan. We lead out on the Black Seraph or we don't lead out at all. No one argued with that because everyone understood what wasn't being said. The remembrance ride wasn't just a motorcycle run. It was the Brotherhood's declaration that they were still standing. After everything, after the losses, after the fractures, after the slow erosion of a decade of grief, they were still here, still moving. The Black Seraph leading that ride was the symbol of all of it. Without it, the ride would still happen. But something would be broken that they might not get back. That was the moment the gate alarm went off. It was a single sharp buzz, the kind that meant someone had approached on foot, which almost never happened. People arriving at the Iron Brotherhood compound came by road by invitation and usually by reputation. Walking up to the gate was something you only did if you had nothing to lose. Dozer pulled out his phone, checked the camera feed, frowned. It's a kid, he said. Grizzly turned. What? Kid. Young. Looks like maybe 18, 19. He's got a backpack. No colors. No bike. Nothing. Dozer paused. He's just standing there. Tell him to leave. Dozer hit the intercom. This is private property. Whatever you're selling, we don't want it. Move along. A second passed. Then the speaker crackled, and a voice came back, young male, tired in a way that went deeper than a night without sleep. I'm not selling anything. I'm here about the bike. I know what's wrong with it. The garage went so quiet that Grizzly could hear the desert wind hitting the metal wall of the building. He looked at Dozer. Dozer looked at him. And without another word, Grizzly Kane walked toward the gate himself. The kid was exactly what Dozer had described. 19 at the absolute outside, maybe younger. A face that still had some boy in it around the edges, but eyes that had been watching hard things for a while. He was wearing jeans that had been worn on the road, not fashion distressed, actually worn, and a gray thermal that had been washed maybe once too many times. The backpack on his shoulder looked like it had crossed several state lines. He had no tools. That was the first thing the Brotherhood members who'd gathered behind Grizzly noted. Every mechanic who'd ever come through that gate had arrived with at least a tool bag, usually a rolling chest. This kid had a backpack, a water bottle clipped to the outside, and his hands in his pockets. Grizzly stopped 3 feet from him and looked at him with the full weight of 30 years of reading men quickly and accurately. You know what's wrong with my bike? He said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. The kid met his eyes directly. No flinching, but no arrogance either. Something else. Something that looked almost like purpose. You got a name? Caleb. Caleb Rourke. The name hit the air and just sat there for a second. Grizzly's expression didn't change on the outside, but something moved behind his eyes. Rourke, he repeated. Yes, sir. You related to Eli Rourke. He's my father. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one in the garage. That one had been about a machine. This one was about a ghost. Eli Rourke, the man who had built the Black Seraph, the man who had been by most accounts the finest custom motorcycle engineer anyone in the Brotherhood had ever known. The man who had been part of the Iron Brotherhood for 12 years before he simply vanished. One morning 6 years ago, his shop was locked. His apartment was empty. His tools were gone. and he left behind nothing but the half-finished black Seraph in a silence that had slowly grown into myth. Some said he'd run, some said he'd been forced to run, some said darker things that no one wanted to repeat out loud in front of Grizzly, because Grizzly had loved Eli Rourke like a brother, and grief in a man like Grizzly, Kane had edges that cut. Grizzly looked at this boy, this thin, road-worn 19-year-old boy, and tried to see Eli in him. He could, around the eyes and the way he stood. "Your father disappeared 6 years ago," Grizzly said. "I know. You've been looking for him." Something crossed Caleb's face. Complicated, in a way. "And you walked up to my gate because the ride is in 5 days." Caleb shifted his weight, not from nerves, from the urgency of what he was carrying. "Because I've known about this bike my whole life. Because my father told me things, taught me things, and I think I understand what's happening to it. And because," he stopped, took a breath, "because I need to see it, to know if I'm right. But I'm right." One of the Brotherhood members behind Grizzly, a man named Tick, red-bearded, skeptical as a tax auditor, let out a short, disbelieving laugh. 73 mechanics couldn't crack it, kid. Some of the best in the country. "And you?" "I know about the 17 seconds, Caleb said. Tick stopped. Grizzly's eyes sharpened. "Say that again." 17 seconds, Caleb repeated steadily. "The engine starts clean, runs perfect, and at exactly 17 seconds, it catastrophically fails. Every time." He looked at Grizzly. "That's not a malfunction." "Then what is it?" Caleb looked past Grizzly, toward the garage, toward the machine he'd been thinking about for years. "It's a lock," he said, "and my father gave me the key." The silence after that was the longest one yet. Grizzly Kane had survived a lot of things by trusting his instincts. The instinct that told him when a man was lying, when a situation was about to turn, when something that looked impossible was actually just disguised. He trusted those instincts more than he trusted most people. Right now, every single one of those instincts was pointing in the same direction. He stepped aside from the gate. "Come in," he said. Caleb Rourke walked through the gate of the Iron Brotherhood compound with a backpack on his shoulder and nothing else. He walked like someone who had rehearsed this moment in his head more times than he could count and was now committed to seeing it through regardless of what it cost him. The gate closed behind him. Dozer fell into step on Caleb's left, Tick on his right, not his escorts exactly. More like the compound, making sure it knew where this unknown quantity was at all times. They walked to the garage. The black Seraph was exactly as Caleb had imagined it. He stopped when he saw it, just for a second, and something in his face, in those road-worn, too old eyes, went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with strategy or confidence or performance. It was recognition. He'd seen photographs, descriptions written in his father's hand. He'd heard about it his entire life, but seeing it in person was different. It was like seeing something holy. He breathed once, deeply, then he walked toward it. "Before you touch anything," Grizzly said from behind him, "you're going to answer some questions." Caleb stopped, turned. "Fair enough," he said. "How old are you?" 19. "Credentials?" "None." Then. "Formal training?" "My father trained me, starting when I was 6. "Your father," Tick said, unable to keep the edge out of his voice, "left 6 years ago. You were 13. 12, Caleb said. "He started teaching me when I was 6. That's 6 years of training before he left. And he left me materials. Notes, schematics, things he knew I'd need eventually." He knew he was going to leave. Grizzly's voice was dangerously quiet. "I don't know everything about why he left," Caleb said. "I know he didn't leave because he wanted to." He held Grizzly's gaze. "I know he thought about me. I know he prepared me for this specifically. And I know that whatever's destroying that engine at 17 seconds, he put it there." The room shifted. "He sabotaged his own bike," Dozer said slowly. "No," Caleb said. "He protected it. There's a difference." Tick leaned against the workbench. "Yet I've been a mechanic for 25 years, and I'm telling you the experts who've looked at this thing looked at the wrong places," Caleb said simply. Not dismissively, factually. They all looked at the engine because that's where the failure happens, but the failure isn't starting in the engine. Grizzly took 3 slow steps toward him. "Then where?" Caleb turned back to the bike. He didn't touch it yet. He walked around it slowly, deliberately, his eyes moving across the frame with an attention that was almost uncomfortable to watch the way someone looks at a person they love. "The frame," he said. For 5 full seconds, no one moved. "The frame," Grizzly repeated. "Yes, sir. Every mechanic who's ever looked at this bike has confirmed the frame is structurally sound, yes. Perfect welds, correct geometry, exceptional quality." Caleb crouched near the lower section of the frame, his eyes tracing something the others couldn't see. But my father wasn't just a mechanic. He was an engineer who thought in systems. He understood that the best place to hide something is inside the thing everyone assumes is already resolved. He stood up. "The frame isn't just a frame, it's architecture. And inside it," he stopped himself. "What?" Grizzly said. Caleb looked up at him. "Can I have 72 hours? The question landed hard. Several people in the room reacted, small movements, quick looks exchanged. 72 hours, Tick said flatly. "The ride is in 5 days. "I know, I'll need 60 of those 72 hours to fix it. The other 12 are for testing. And if you can't fix it," Caleb's expression didn't waver, "I'll fix it." "That's not what I asked." A pause. "If I can't fix it, you're exactly where you are right now, which is nowhere." He said it without cruelty, just math. "You have nothing to lose by letting me try." Grizzly Kane stood in the center of that garage, surrounded by men who had followed him through hell, looking at a 19-year-old with a backpack who claimed to carry his missing father's secrets inside him. He made the decision the same way he made every decision that mattered, fast, clear, and without apology. 72 hours, he said. "You work in this garage. You don't leave the compound without an escort. Someone is with you at all times." "Understood." "And Caleb." "Sir," Grizzly's voice dropped. "Just enough. If you're playing some kind of game with my brotherhood, with this machine, with the memory of your father's name—" "I'm not," Caleb said, quietly. "Absolutely. I've been working toward this for years, my whole life in a way." He looked at the bike again, at the Black Seraph. "This is the most important thing I'll ever do." Something in those words hung in the air with a weight that surprised everyone in the room, including, it seemed, Grizzly himself. He nodded once. "Get started." Caleb Roark set his backpack on the floor, unzipped it, and began to remove items with the careful precision of someone who had packed for exactly this moment. A custom set of tools, not many, but each one clearly chosen. A worn leather notebook, a small light that clipped to his collar. He pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves. He crouched in front of the Black Seraph, and he started to work. The Brotherhood watched. Not one of them would admit it out loud, not Grizzly, not Dozer, not Tick, not the dozen other men who drifted in from the yard over the next hour. But every single one of them felt the same thing. Something had changed in the garage. It wasn't hope exactly. They'd had hope 73 times before, and it had burned them every single one. This was something else, harder to name. Somewhere between recognition and dread. Like the feeling you get when you realize that the thing you've been waiting for has finally arrived. And you're not sure yet whether that's good news. Caleb worked in silence for the first 20 minutes. He didn't touch the engine. He didn't run diagnostics. He moved around the frame slowly, methodically, pressing his fingers along welds, tapping lightly with a small instrument, pausing and listening in the way that skilled people listen to machines, the way doctors press a stethoscope to a chest and hear things that aren't obvious. Tick eventually couldn't take the silence. "You gonna tell us what you're looking for?" Caleb didn't look up. "I'll tell you when I find it. And if you don't find it, I'll find it." "Your confidence is real charming." "It's not confidence," Caleb said, running his fingers along a section of the lower frame with focused attention. "My father told me where to look. I'm looking there." "Your father told you?" Tick stopped, started again. "Your father built this bike and then disappeared for 6 years. And the whole time he was sending you what? Instructions, letters, notes on how to fix a bike he built for a club he abandoned." The word abandoned hit the garage like a stone hitting still water. Caleb stopped moving. He was quiet for a moment. When he looked up at Tick, his expression was controlled, deliberately controlled in the way that means something underneath is moving hard. "My father didn't abandon this brotherhood," he said. "Whatever happened, that's not what happened, and I'll prove that too. But right now," he turned back to the frame, "right now I need to find the seam." "What seam?" Dozer asked. Caleb pressed his palm flat against a section of the main frame tube midpoint, slightly toward the left side. He pressed, released, pressed again in a slightly different spot. Then he went completely still. Here, he said quietly. He reached into his tool roll and pulled out a custom instrument that none of them recognized, thin, almost like a dental probe with a flattened, angled tip. He pressed it carefully into what appeared to be a weld seam and applied the gentlest possible lateral pressure. There was a sound, barely audible, a click that was less sound than sensation. And a section of the frame, a 3-inch section that had appeared to be solid welded steel, separated along a hairline joint that was invisible until that moment. What in the... Dozer stepped forward involuntarily. Behind the open section set into a cavity machined into the frame wall itself was a capsule, roughly the diameter of a pen, made of something that caught the light differently than steel, denser, darker. Titanium. Stamped on its surface in letters just large enough to read R. Caleb reached in, carefully closed his fingers around it, and lifted it out. He held it in his palm and looked at it for a long moment, with an expression that the men watching him would later struggle to describe. Not triumph, not surprise, something older than both of those. He looked at it like he was looking at his father's handwriting. Grizzly Kane hadn't moved from his position at the back of the group, but now he walked forward until he was standing directly over Caleb's shoulder, looking down at the titanium capsule in the boy's gloved hand. "R," Grizzly said. "Rourke," Caleb said. "His mark." Grizzly's voice was very quiet. "What's inside it?" Caleb looked up at him. "I don't know yet," he said, "but there's more than one." He turned back to the frame. "Help me find them." Caleb didn't wait for permission. He was already moving. He handed the first titanium capsule to Grizzly without looking at him the way you hand something precious to someone you trust instinctively, and went back to the frame with both hands. His fingers moved faster now. Not rushed, but certain. Like a man reading a language he'd studied his whole life and was finally holding the real text. "Tell me what you know about the frame construction," he said, not to anyone, specifically to the room. Dozer answered first. "Chromoly steel, hand-welded. Eli did every inch himself over about 8 months." "Did any of the mechanics ever remove sections of the frame during inspection?" Tick crossed his arms. "Nobody touched the frame. The failure was in the engine. That's where everyone looked." "That's why nobody found anything," Caleb said, pressing his fingers along the upper frame rail, working slowly toward the headstock. "My father knew that. He counted on it." "He counted on nobody finding it," Grizzly said. "He counted on the right person finding it." Caleb's fingers stopped. He pressed same technique as before, palm flat, specific location, lateral pressure with the probe. Another hairline separation. Another cavity. Another titanium capsule slightly larger than the first, stamped with the same letter. R. He set it next to the first one on the workbench without opening either. "There's a third," he said. "How do you know?" Dozer asked. "Because my father thought in threes, always. 3-point verification on every system he designed. 3 redundancies on anything critical. 3 confirmation points before he considered something proven." Caleb moved to the rear section of the frame near the swing arm pivot. He built it into his engineering philosophy so deep it was unconscious. 3 meant he was sure. The room was watching him differently now. The skepticism was still there. It had to be. These were men who had been burned 73 times, but something had shifted underneath it. The 2 capsules sitting on the workbench were real. The hidden cavities were real. Whatever game this boy was playing, it was built on something genuine. Tick moved closer without quite meaning to. Caleb found the 3rd cavity in 11 minutes. Same hairline seam, same machine pocket in the frame wall. This capsule was different, wider, shorter, and sealed with what appeared to be a secondary wax compound over the standard cap. Older looking, like it had been placed first. He lifted it out and held it alongside the other 2. 3 capsules. 3 R's. Sitting in a row on the workbench of the Iron Brotherhood garage while 7 men stood around them in silence and tried to understand what they were looking at. Grizzly spoke first. "Open them." Caleb shook his head. Grizzly's expression hardened immediately. "Excuse me, not yet." Caleb set the 3rd capsule down carefully and turned to face him. "I need to understand the engine failure mechanism first. If I open these before I know what I'm dealing with mechanically, I might miss something. The sequence matters." "The sequence?" Tick repeated, his voice carrying a note that wasn't quite disbelief anymore. My father designed this in order. The frame first, then the engine, then the capsules. That's the sequence he would have intended. If I skip ahead, I might misread what's in them. He looked at Grizzly steadily. Give me 2 more hours on the engine before we open anything. Grizzly looked at him for a long time. 2 hours, he said finally. Caleb nodded and turned to the engine. What happened over the next 90 minutes was something the men in that garage would describe differently depending on who you asked, but they all agreed on one thing. Watching Caleb Rourke work on that engine was unlike watching any of the previous 73 mechanics. Not because he was faster or louder or more dramatic. It was the opposite. He was quiet in a way that felt expensive. The kind of focused quiet that costs something that requires you to shut down every part of your brain that wants to perform or explain or reassure an audience. He wasn't working for them, and he was working for the machine. He pulled apart the engine with clean, unhesitating movements, setting each component in precise sequence on a cloth laid out on the floor. He examined each bearing housing under his collar by running his fingernail along surfaces, holding parts at angles that caught light differently. He muttered to himself occasionally fragments, not sentences, numbers, technical phrases in a shorthand that nobody in the room recognized. At one point, Dozer leaned over to Tick and whispered, "Is he talking to himself or the bike?" Tick watched Caleb for another moment. "Both," he said quietly. 50 minutes in, Caleb stopped. He was holding a bearing assembly, small, precisely machined, appearing to the naked eye to be in perfect condition. He turned it slowly under the light. "Got you," he said softly. Nobody moved. He carried the bearing to the workbench and set it under a magnification lens he'd pulled from his bag. He adjusted the focus, leaned in, and was still for almost a full minute. Then he straightened up. He looked at the bearing, then he looked at Grizzly. Every expert who looked at this engine checked the bearing tolerances against standard specifications, he said. "That's correct," Grizzly said, and they all came back within spec. Every time, because they were checking against standard specifications. Caleb pointed at the bearing under the lens. "My father didn't build this engine to standard specifications. He built it to his own specifications, which are tighter in some cases by a factor of 4. This bearing meets standard. It doesn't meet Eli Rourke's standard. Under normal operating temperatures, it performs perfectly. But at 17 seconds of sustained operation, the heat differential in this particular engine design reaches a threshold that no standard bearing can handle. The metal fatigues microscopically. At exactly 17 seconds, it fails catastrophically. Every time, on every attempt, without exception." Tick stared at him. "You're saying the failure mechanism is thermal. I'm saying my father engineered a machine that requires components that don't exist in standard manufacturing because he made them himself. The bearings in this engine need to be fabricated to his custom tolerances, or it will always fail at 17 seconds. Caleb looked around the room. That's why nobody could fix it. They were fixing the wrong problem with the wrong specifications. They were trying to repair something they didn't have the blueprint for. Grizzly's voice was careful, controlled. "And you have the blueprint?" "My father gave it to me, yes." The silence that followed was heavy with something that hadn't been in that garage for 3 years. It was the specific weight of a problem that might actually have a solution. Dozer said what everyone was thinking. "Can you make the bearings? I'll need a lathe and precision tooling. We have a machine shop on the south end of the compound. I know what tolerances I need. If the equipment is good enough, yes, I can make them." Tick shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, but in the particular way a man shakes his head when the world has just surprised him in a direction he didn't expect. Eli Rourke built an engine that could only be fixed by someone who had his personal specifications, he said, which he gave to his son, which means he planned this, Grizzly said. His voice had gone very quiet. "He built a lock, and he gave the key to Caleb." He looked at the boy directly. Why would he do that? Why would he disappear and leave a machine that only his son could fix? Caleb was quiet for a moment. He looked at the 3 titanium capsules on the workbench. "I think that's what those will tell us," he said. "Then open them," Grizzly said. "Now." This time Caleb didn't argue. He pulled on fresh gloves and picked up the 3rd capsule, The one that had been placed first, the one with the wax seal, and worked the cap carefully. The wax crumbled away in dry flakes. The cap turned with resistance, then released. Inside was a rolled piece of paper, thin as onion skin, sealed in a clear membrane that had kept it dry and intact. Caleb peeled the membrane away, unrolled the paper, read it. His face changed. Not dramatically, not at the way faces change in movies with tears springing up and jaws dropping. The change was quieter than that and more devastating for it. Something in his expression, in the specific set of his mouth, and the way his eyes moved across the page, went through something private and painful, and entirely his own right there in front of 7 men who were watching every breath he took. He read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then he looked up. "It's a letter," he said. "From Eli," Grizzly said. "Yes." "What does it say?" Caleb folded it once carefully. "Some of it is for me. Some of it I'll share with you. There's a part that concerns the Brotherhood directly." He set it on the workbench. But first, he picked up the second capsule, worked it open. Inside was a small, folded document, denser paper, official looking. He unfolded it and scanned it. His eyes slowed, stopped. "What is it?" Dozer asked. Caleb looked up. His voice was even, but something underneath it was working hard to stay that way. "A medical record," he said. The temperature in the room changed. Grizzly took a step forward. "Whose?" Caleb looked at him. Then at the room. His eyes found Grizzly's and held them with an intensity that made several of the other men look away because it felt like witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. "Tommy Maddox," he said. The name hit the garage like a physical thing. 2 of the men went completely rigid. Dozer looked at the floor. Tick made a sound low in his throat that wasn't quite a word. And Grizzly Kane, the man who had survived 2 wars and buried 11 brothers and negotiated truces and faced down everything the world had thrown at him, Grizzly Kane's face did something in that moment that none of the men present had ever seen it do before. It broke, just for a second, one unguarded, uncontrolled second. Then he locked it back down so fast that if you'd blinked, you would have missed it. "Why, Via?" he said, and his voice was very carefully flat. "Does your father have a medical record for Tommy Maddox?" "I don't know yet," Caleb said. "I haven't read it." "Then read it." "Grizzly, read it out loud." Caleb looked at the document in his hands. He looked at Grizzly. He made a decision that cost him something. You could see it cost him the way his shoulders settled before he spoke, the way a man settles himself before lifting something heavy. He read it. The document was a hospital record from 11 years ago, an emergency intake form, and an attached pathology note. It described the circumstances of Tommy Maddox's admission following a motorcycle accident on Highway 93 outside of Boulder City, Nevada. It described his injuries in clinical language that somehow made them more terrible, not less. And in the pathology addendum attached separately and signed by a physician whose credentials were listed in full, it described the findings of the toxicology report. Tommy Maddox had made a choice the morning of that accident. A private choice not shared with anyone at the Brotherhood, not shared with the friends riding beside him. A choice that the medical record documented in precise, unarguable clinical language. A choice that meant the accident was not caused by mechanical failure, was not caused by road conditions, was not caused by another rider's error or negligence, was not specifically caused by Eli Rourke's presence beside him on that road. When Caleb finished reading, the garage was so quiet that the hum of the compound's electrical system was audible from outside. Tick said very slowly, "That means crowbar." He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew what it meant. Vince Maddox called crowbar, since before most of them could remember, had spent 11 years living with the belief that his younger brother Tommy had died because of Eli Rourke. Not a formal accusation, nothing that went to law, but in the currency of the Brotherhood, that kind of belief was harder to fight than any court case. It had eaten crowbar from the inside out for 11 years. It had destroyed friendships, fractured alliances, driven wedges through relationships that used to be foundational. And Eli Rourke had disappeared in part under the weight of a blame he had never been able to disprove, because the proof had been in the medical record, and the medical record had been locked in a titanium capsule inside the frame of a motorcycle that only one person in the world had the knowledge to open. Grizzly sat down. He sat down on a stool by the workbench, which was something none of them had ever seen him do in the middle of a situation because Grizzly Kane did not sit down under pressure. He stood, always. It was almost a physical law. He sat down and he put both hands on the workbench and he breathed. He kept it, Grizzly said very quietly. Eli kept the proof all this time. He couldn't use it when it happened, Caleb said carefully. I think from what I understand, the record was sealed. He wasn't supposed to have it. Getting it cost him something significant, and using it directly would have... He stopped. It's in the letter, some of it. Then give me the letter. Caleb hesitated for the first time since he'd walked through the gate. A real hesitation, not a strategic pause. He looked at the folded paper on the workbench, and the look on his face in that moment was the look of a boy, not a mechanic. 19 years old, a father's first direct words in 6 years, sitting under his hand, in a room full of men waiting for him to surrender them. He picked up the letter, he unfolded it, and he began to read the parts that weren't his. Eli Rourke's words in Eli Rourke's handwriting, reading out through his son's voice in a garage full of men who had loved him and been abandoned by him, and spent years building a mythology around his absence. Eli wrote that he had not left by choice. He wrote that circumstances had made remaining a danger not to himself, but to people he could not protect from inside the Brotherhood. He wrote without specifics because specifics would have been weaponizable, but with a clarity of purpose that left no room for doubt. He had left to protect something, multiple somethings. He did not name them. He wrote that the bike was a message, that the design was intentional, that the 17-second failure was engineered to prevent the machine from being used until it was ready, until the right person could complete it. He had taught Caleb everything Caleb would need because he had known with a father's particular certainty that his son would come. He had simply hoped it wouldn't take this long. Caleb's voice stayed steady through most of it. It wavered once on a single line near the end of the section, meant for the Brotherhood, a line where Eli Rourke wrote, "Tell Grizzly I kept every promise, the ones he knows about and the ones I couldn't tell him I was making." Grizzly didn't move when he heard it. His hands on the workbench stayed still. But the line of his jaw changed, tightened to the edge of something, and held there. Caleb stopped reading. He refolded the part of the letter that was his alone and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his chest. The compound could keep the rest. That part was his. Dozer broke the silence first because Dozer was the one who usually did when Grizzly couldn't. "The third capsule," he said. "You haven't opened the first one." Caleb looked at the capsule he'd set aside, the smallest one, the one marked R, with slightly different stamping cleaner edges made later than the others. "No," he said. "What's in it?" "I don't know," Caleb said honestly. "But my father put it there last and sealed it last, which means it's either." He stopped, turned the capsule in his fingers. "It's either the most important thing or the most dangerous." "Open it," Grizzly said. His voice had come back fully now, and it carried the full weight of a man who had decided. "Open everything. No more partial truths in this garage." Caleb opened the first capsule. Inside, smaller than he'd expected, was a component. Machined metal custom, unfamiliar to anyone in the room except Caleb. He held it up in the light. "What is that?" Tick asked. Caleb turned it over once. His expression went through something fast and technical, and then landed somewhere much simpler. He looked up. "It's the last part," he said. "The custom bearing component for the engine. My father pre-manufactured it. He put it in the capsule 6 years ago." He paused. "It was here the whole time. I don't need the machine shop." Another pause longer. "I can fix the bike right now." The room exploded. Not in celebration and chaos, everyone speaking at once. Tick's voice cutting over Dozer's. 2 other Brotherhood members who'd been quiet until now, suddenly animated voices raised questions tumbling over each other. Grizzly stood up from the stool. "Quiet," he said. One word. The room went silent, the way rooms go silent, when the right person speaks at the right volume with the right weight behind it. He looked at Caleb. "You can fix it right now." "Yes. Tonight. If you give me access to what I need, yes." Grizzly was quiet for a moment. "How long?" 6 hours. Maybe 8 to be safe." Grizzly looked at his watch, looked at his men, looked at the black seraph. Then he looked at Caleb Rourke, 19 years old, his father's ghost standing behind him in every line of his face. "Get to work," he said. Caleb was already reaching for his tools. But that was the moment the garage door opened. Not the main door, the side door. The one that accessed the yard from the south end. And a man walked in who made three people in the room immediately tense in ways their bodies couldn't hide. He was big. Not dozer big, but wide across the shoulders in a way that spoke of labor rather than gym time. His face had the particular texture of a man who had been both very angry and very sad for a very long time and had stopped distinguishing between the two. His road name was Crowbar. His real name was Vince Maddox. He was Tommy Maddox's brother. He looked around the garage, took in the workbench, the capsules, the letter partially visible, Caleb on his knees in front of the engine. And then he looked at Grizzly. Someone told me, he said slowly, that Eli Rourke's kid is in here opening things up out of that bike. His eyes moved back to Caleb. Someone told me there's a medical record in there about Tommy. The silence in the garage had a different quality now. Not the silence of anticipation. The silence of a room that understood something dangerous had just walked through the door. Grizzly moved to position himself between Crowbar and Caleb. Not aggressively, just as a man naturally takes his place when a situation requires structure. Vince, he said quietly. Don't, Crowbar said. His voice was low and it was shaking slightly. Not from weakness, from the specific tremor that comes from holding something enormous very tightly for a very long time. Don't manage me right now, Grizzly. I've been managed for 11 years. I heard Tommy's name. I have the right to be here. Grizzly held his position. Nobody's saying you don't. Crowbar's eyes went to the medical document still on the workbench. He looked at it for a long moment, then back at Grizzly. What does it say? And Grizzly Kane, who had survived everything, who had managed every impossible moment with the same controlled, authoritative calm, looked at Vince Maddox, who had buried his brother and spent 11 years distributing the blame to the wrong man, and told him the truth. He told him everything, every word, flat and clear and with no softening, because Vince Maddox had earned the truth without softening. When Grizzly finished, the garage was so still that Caleb, still kneeling in front of the engine with a precision tool in his hand, could hear Crowbar breathing. For a long time, Crowbar didn't speak. He didn't move. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes somewhere in the middle distance, and his face doing things that men's faces rarely do in front of witnesses. Then he said very quietly, 11 years. Grizzly said nothing. 11 years Crowbar stopped. His voice had cracked on the last word, and he stopped to deal with that the way a man deals with something that refused to behave in front of an audience. 11 years I blamed him. I told people. He stopped again. I drove him out. I made it impossible for him to. He looked at the letter on the workbench. He knew the whole time. He had the proof and he left instead of using it. He left instead of it tearing the brotherhood apart, Grizzly said carefully. That's what the letter says, Vince. He chose the brotherhood over his own name. Crowbar looked at the black seraph, at Caleb kneeling in front of it, at this boy who carried his father's knowledge and his father's tools in his father's eyes. I'm sorry, he said. He said it to Caleb, directly across the garage with nothing between them. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know. It's okay, Caleb said. He hadn't turned around. His voice was steady, but his hands had paused on the component he was holding. My father would want you to know it's okay. Crowbar made a sound that wasn't quite speech. He turned and walked back out the side door. Not running, just walking with the particular deliberate gait of a man who needs to be alone with something enormous. The door closed. The garage held the aftermath of the last several minutes in complete silence. Then Dozer, who had been standing with his arms at his sides and his eyes tracking everything like a man who understood that he was witnessing something he would remember for the rest of his life, exhaled slowly and said, okay. Just that one word. Caleb picked up the precision tool again. I need everyone to clear the floor around the engine by about 3 feet, he said. I'm going to start installation. Nobody argued. Everyone moved. Outside, the Nevada night was coming down cold and clear, and somewhere in the compound, Vince Maddox sat with 11 years of misplaced grief in his hands, trying to figure out what a man does with weight he's been carrying in the wrong direction. And inside, Caleb Rourke worked. He worked with the focused, complete attention of someone fulfilling a purpose that had been years in the making. Each component went in with the precision of a man who had not just memorized specifications, but understood them at a level that came from being taught them by someone who loved both the knowledge and the student. At one point, an hour in Grizzly crouched beside him. "Your father," he said quietly just between them. "The letter." "What did he say?" "The part that was yours." Caleb didn't stop working. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry it took so long. He said, another pause. He said he watched me from wherever he was. He said I turned out better than he deserved. Grizzly was quiet. "He said to finish the bike," Caleb said. His voice was completely controlled, almost clinical. "He said to give it to the Brotherhood. He said some debts get paid with decades." Grizzly put his hand on Caleb's shoulder for a moment. Just a moment. Then he stood up. "Keep working," he said. "Yes, sir," Caleb said. And the black seraph began slowly, methodically, with the hands of Eli Rourke's son, to become whole again. The first hour passed in near silence, broken only by the precise sounds of Caleb's tools and the occasional shift of boots on the concrete floor as men repositioned themselves around the garage. Nobody left. That said something. These were men who had places to be, responsibilities inside the compound, people waiting on them. But nobody left. Dozer had quietly sent word to the kitchen for coffee and food, and someone had brought it in without ceremony. Paper cups, a box of sandwiches from the compound kitchen, and it sat untouched on the far workbench because nobody wanted to be the first one to look away long enough to eat. Caleb worked with a kind of economy of motion that only comes from years of practice. No wasted movements? No second guessing. Each component went into place with the confidence of a man reading from a map he'd memorized, and except the map was in his hands, and his muscle memory in the specific way his father's voice lived inside his head when he was doing mechanical work, instructing, correcting, explaining the why behind every decision. He was installing the second custom bearing assembly when the side door opened again. Not Crowbar this time. Someone else. A man named Dutch Older Gray at the Temples, one of the Brotherhood's senior members who had been out of the compound when Caleb arrived. He stepped in, looked at the scene, looked at Caleb on the floor, looked at the workbench with the 3 open capsules in the letter and the medical document. Then he looked at Grizzly with an expression that said he'd already heard enough to have formed an opinion, and the opinion was hostile. "Can I talk to you?" Dutch said. Not a question. Grizzly looked at him steadily. "Whatever you want to say it here." Dutch glanced at Caleb's back. "That's Eli Rourke's kid." "It is. And you let him inside. You gave him access to the bike." "I did." Grizzly, Dutch's voice dropped but didn't quiet. It took on the particular intensity of a man trying to communicate urgency without causing a scene and failing at the second part. Eli Rourke walked out of this Brotherhood. Whatever reason this kid claims, whatever is in those capsules, that man abandoned us. He abandoned you. And now you're going to let his son work on the most important machine we own 3 days before the remembrance ride, based on what the kid's word, based on the fact that he found 3 hidden cavities in that frame inside of 40 minutes. Tick said from the corner. His voice carried a note of something that surprised even him. He was defending the kid. He hadn't quite decided to do that consciously, but there it was. Based on the fact that he identified the exact failure mechanism. Based on the fact that the capsules are real Dutch. We can see them. "I see a 19-year-old kid with no credentials in a story," Dutch said. "I see a compound that's been burned 73 times and is apparently ready to be burned a 74th. "Dutch," Grizzly's voice was quiet, final. "He's working. The conversation is over." Dutch looked at Grizzly for a long moment, then at Caleb. Then he walked back out the side door without another word, and the room exhaled. Caleb hadn't stopped working, hadn't turned around. But Dozer, who was standing closest to him, had noticed something. Caleb's hands had slowed slightly during Dutch's speech. Not from distraction, from listening, from the specific kind of careful attention paid to words that matter. "You heard all that," Dozer said quietly, not accusing. "Yes," Caleb said. "It bother you." A pause. One careful movement, a bearing slid into its housing with a soft precision click. "He's not wrong to be suspicious," Caleb said. "He loves this Brotherhood. He's protecting it. That's the same thing my father loved about this club. That's not nothing." Dozer looked at him for a moment with an expression he didn't bother to conceal, because Caleb's back was still turned. It was the expression of a man who has just been surprised by someone younger than he expected to be capable of that kind of thought. Your father talked to you about us, Dozer said. He talked to me about loyalty, Caleb said. He used this brotherhood as his example, every time. The room absorbed that quietly. 40 minutes later, Caleb set down his tools, sat back on his heels, and looked at the engine. He reached in and rotated a component, manually testing resistance feeling for the specific tactile feedback he needed. He did it 3 times. Each time, his expression processed something internal and complex. Then he stood up. First phase is done, he said. Grizzly looked up from where he'd been standing. Meaning, the bearing assemblies are installed. The engine should be capable of sustained operation now. But I need to rebuild the specific housing sequence before we can test it, and that's going to take another. He checked his watch, and something crossed his face. He looked at Grizzly. Where does the compound get precision fasteners? Metric fine thread, titanium grade. Grizzly glanced at Dozer. We order them, Dozer said, from a supplier in Reno. Takes 48 hours minimum. Caleb was quiet. That's a problem, Tick asked. Tell me it's not, Caleb said. And the way he said it, half request, half prayer, made clear that it was. What do you need specifically, Dozer asked. Caleb rattled off 4 specifications so precisely and so rapidly that Dozer grabbed a pen from his shirt pocket and started writing on his palm. That's specific, Dozer said when Caleb finished. My father's housing design uses non-standard thread pitch in the top 3 mounting positions. Standard metric won't hold under operating load. It'll last through a test run, but fail under sustained riding conditions. Caleb looked at the engine. If I use standard fasteners and the bike holds through the remembrance ride, it'll fail within 100 miles in front of 700 people. Then we find what you need, Grizzly said. He looked at Dozer. Call everyone, every shop contact, every supplier, every brotherhood chapter within driving distance. I want those specifications matched by morning. Grizzly, it's past 10 o'clock. Then people are going to have a late night, Grizzly said. Make the calls. Dozer was already moving toward the door phone, out palm covered in ink. Caleb watched him go, then looked back at the engine with an expression that was doing a great deal of private work. He was calculating, reorganizing, finding the path through the problem with whatever he had available. While we wait on the fasteners, he said, I can work on the housing preparation. Get everything staged. The moment the parts arrive, installation is 2 hours, maybe less. Do it, Grizzly said. Caleb bent back down. It was Tick who noticed at first, 40 minutes into Caleb's housing preparation work. He'd been watching the kid work with the specific attention of a mechanic watching another mechanic. Professional curiosity, partly, but also something more personal. He'd been one of the harshest voices when the kid walked through the gate. He was aware of that. The awareness had been sitting with him uncomfortably for the last 2 hours. What he noticed was the notebook. Caleb had set it open on the floor beside him, referencing it periodically. Pages covered in dense handwriting, diagrams, measurements, notes in 2 different hands. One handwriting was clearly older, more practiced. The other was younger, tighter, responding to the first. Can I look at that? Tick asked. Caleb glanced at the notebook. The technical sections, yes. Tick crouched and picked it up carefully. He turned pages slowly. What he was looking at was a conversation that had been conducted on paper across years. Eli Rourke's handwriting, instructions, specifications, explanations. Caleb's hand responding with questions, observations, corrections, when he'd worked something out differently. A teaching record, a mechanical dialogue between a father and son who couldn't be in the same room. Tick sat down cross-legged on the floor with the notebook in his lap and read in silence for a long time. Eventually he said without looking up, How long did he send you these? He didn't send them, Caleb said. They were left for me before he disappeared. 3 notebooks. He wrote them over years, the technical stuff, the specs, the design philosophy. He left them somewhere I'd find them when I was old enough to understand them. A pause. I found the first one when I was 15. I'd been looking for 3 years by then. Tick looked up. He hid notebooks for you. He planned ahead. Something in Caleb's voice on those 3 words was carefully neutral in the way that meant the emotion behind them was significant. That was his way. Think 12 steps out. Never leave someone you love without the tools they need. Tick looked back down at the notebook. Then quietly, with none of the aggression from earlier and all of the directness that was apparently just how this man communicated, I was wrong about you when you came through the gate. Caleb didn't respond immediately. He made a precise adjustment to the housing prep, then said, you were protecting something you love, same as him. Tick closed the notebook and set it down carefully. He stood up and went back to his corner of the garage, and he didn't say anything else, but something in his posture had changed. The compound was quieter outside as the night deepened. Most of the membership had gone to their bunks or their bikes or wherever men go when they need to process something large. The events of the evening, the capsules, the letter, the medical record. Crowbar's face in the moment of hearing had moved through the compound like a current, and people were sitting with it individually, the way grief and revelation always have to be processed alone, first, then together. Grizzly hadn't left the garage. He hadn't sat back down either. He stood with his coffee going cold in his hand, watching Caleb work, and thinking about Eli Rourke. The way you think about someone when the story you had about them has just been revised in fundamental ways. He'd thought Eli left. He'd thought in his most honest moments that the pressures, the blame from Crowbar, the toxicity of an unsolvable accusation, the specific grinding weight of being suspected by people you love had simply become too much, and Eli had chosen himself over the brotherhood. That had hurt in a way Grizzly had never fully articulated to anyone, because Grizzly didn't articulate that kind of hurt. He just carried it. Now he was standing in his garage at midnight with the knowledge that Eli Rourke had left to protect. Something had spent 6 years in whatever exile he'd chosen, had built a proof of his innocence into the machine itself, had prepared his son to deliver it, and had never once, from what the letter said, stopped considering the brotherhood his. Grizzly, Caleb said. He looked up. Caleb had paused his work and turned around. He was holding something, a small component, separate from the engine work that he'd apparently retrieved from the bottom of his backpack. My father asked me to give you this in person, Caleb said. It's not in the letter. He told me verbally. Before he disappeared, he sat me down. I was 12, and he said, if anything happens to me, and if you ever find yourself in front of Grizzly Kane, give him this. He held it out. Grizzly crossed the garage and took it. It was a small key, old-style brass, the kind that opened a lockbox or a safe or a storage unit. On a piece of tape wrapped around the bow in Eli Rourke's handwriting, 3 words. South wall. Everything. Grizzly stared at it. Do you know what it opens? Caleb asked. Grizzly looked up slowly. Something in his expression was happening that he wasn't in control of, and he knew it, and he let it happen. Yeah, he said. I know what it opens. He looked at the key for another long moment. Then he closed his fist around it. There's a storage unit on the south wall of the compound, he said. Eli had it. He built it himself years ago. After he disappeared, we never opened it. I still don't know why exactly. He paused. Maybe I wasn't ready to find out what was in it. What are you going to do? Caleb asked. Grizzly looked at him, looked at the engine, looked at the clock on the wall. I'm going to wait until the bike is running, he said. Some things should be opened in order. He put the key in his shirt pocket. Keep working. Caleb turned back to the engine. But the night wasn't done surprising them. It was just past 2 in the morning when Dozer came back through the main door, moving faster than his size usually permitted, which immediately told everyone in the garage that something had happened. We got a problem, he said. Grizzly set his coffee down. Talk. The machine shop. Dozer's breathing was slightly elevated. South end. Someone's been in there. The room went alert instantly, the specific sharpening of attention that happens in a group of men trained to respond to threat. What do you mean, been in there? Tick said. I mean, the door was open when it should have been locked, and the precision lathe, the one Caleb would have needed if the pre-manufactured component hadn't been in the capsule, it's been damaged. Deliberately, the chuck is cracked, and the lid screw has been bent. Silence. Someone, Grizzly said very carefully and quietly, damaged the machine shop equipment. Tonight. Yes. While we were all in here. Yes. Grizzly looked at Caleb. Caleb had turned around and his face was working through something. Quickly, the implications, the sequence, the specific meaning of what Dozer was describing. If I hadn't had the pre-manufactured component, Caleb said slowly, I would have needed to fabricate the bearing on that lathe. If someone knew that, someone inside this compound, Tick said, and the words landed like stones, knew what you needed, knew that damaging the lathe would stop you. Which means they knew what you were doing before you found the capsule, Dozer said. Before anyone outside this garage knew there was a component to find, everyone understood simultaneously what that meant. Someone had known what was in the bike ahead of time. The garage locked down without a word being exchanged. It was a brotherhood response, instinctive, and total. Tick moved to the main door, Dozer to the side door. Grizzly stood in the center of the room, and his face had become the particular expression of a man making a list. "Nobody in or out," Grizzly said. "Not until morning." "The fasteners," Caleb said. "Dozer was calling suppliers." "Dozer will call from in here," Grizzly said. He looked at Caleb. "You keep working. Don't stop for anything." Caleb turned back to the engine. His hands went back to work. But the set of his shoulders had changed tighter, more contained, and Dozer, standing closest, could see that his hands were entirely steady, which was either a sign of extraordinary composure or the kind of focus that simply doesn't have room for fear. "You're not scared," Dozer said quietly. "I'm terrified," Caleb said equally quietly. "But my father didn't prepare me for this by teaching me to stop when I got scared. He prepared me by making me practice until the fear didn't reach my hands." Dozer had nothing to say to that. He made his calls. The first 3 suppliers were dead ends, wrong specifications, no stock minimum order quantities that were functionally useless. The 4th was a Brotherhood-connected shop outside Las Vegas that had a member at the counter, even at 2 in the morning, because that was the kind of network the Iron Brotherhood maintained, not for illegal purposes, but for exactly this, the understanding that when a brother called, someone picked up. The man on the phone listened to the specifications, was quiet for a moment, then said, "We've got close, not exact, within 2 thou on the thread pitch." Dozer looked at Caleb. "Within 2 thou on thread pitch," he said. Caleb's hands paused. He was quiet for 3 seconds, the specific silence of someone doing math they're not entirely happy about. "It'll hold through the ride," he said. "It won't hold for years, but it'll hold for the ride." "Tell him we need them by 6 a.m., Dozer said into the phone. "I don't care how." The man on the other end didn't ask questions. He said he'd drive them himself. Dozer hung up and looked at Grizzly. 6 a.m. Grizzly looked at the clock. 4 hours. "Caleb," he said. "I heard." Caleb was already reorganizing his approach to the remaining work. Dozer could see it in the subtle shift of his movements, the recalculation happening in real time. "I can stage everything else. The moment those fasteners arrive, I install, and we can do a test run within the hour." "A test run," Grizzly said. "You mean start it?" "Yes." "In the 17 seconds. Caleb turned and looked at him directly. "Won't happen. The failure mechanism has been corrected. The bearing assemblies are installed correctly to my father's specifications. The housing is prepared correctly. When those fasteners go in," he paused, not from uncertainty, from the specific weight of what he was about to say, "the engine will run." Grizzly held his gaze. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Caleb said. And then more quietly, "I'm my father's son. I'm sure." Grizzly nodded once. The next 3 hours were the longest and shortest that anyone in that garage could remember. Long because the waiting had a texture to it, heavy, compressed, loaded with everything that was at stake. Short because Caleb never stopped moving, never stopped working, and watching him work had a strange time-collapsing quality, the way watching a skilled person do something completely absorbing can eat hours without you noticing. Dozer fell asleep in a chair at 3:30 and woke up at 4:15 to find that Tick had put a jacket over him without comment and was standing at the workbench drinking cold coffee. He didn't say anything about the jacket. Tick didn't acknowledge it. At 4:40, there was a sound from outside the compound. Tires on gravel, headlights sweeping across the high windows. Dozer was at the door. He checked the camera on his phone. "It's a truck," he said. "Brotherhood plates." He opened the door, and the man from the Las Vegas shop walked in carrying a small metal case with a particular careful movement of someone transporting something precise. He was maybe 50, heavy-set, wearing a cut that had seen a lot of weather. He looked around the garage, looked at the black Seraph, looked at Caleb. "You Eli Rourke's boy," he said. Caleb stood up. "Yes, sir." The man looked at him for a long moment. "Eli was a friend of mine," he said, "a long time ago." He held out the case. "These are the best I could do on short notice." Caleb took it, opened it, examined the fasteners under his collar light, comparing each one to the notes in his open notebook. He worked through all four measuring with a precision tool from his bag. Then he looked up. "They'll work," he said. The man from Las Vegas nodded once, declined coffee, and drove back into the dark without fanfare. Because that was how people in this world operated. When it mattered, you did the thing, and you went home. Caleb was already on the floor. What happened in the next 90 minutes was watched by every person in that garage with the specific attention of witnesses, not audience witnesses. There's a difference. An audience watches for entertainment. Witnesses watch because they understand they are present at something that will require them to report accurately later. Grizzly didn't blink. Tick set his coffee down and didn't pick it up again. Dozer stood with his arms at his sides. Each fastener went in with deliberate measured torque. Caleb used a beam-style torque wrench from his bag, the old-fashioned kind, more accurate than digital when you knew how to use it, which he did. He called out each torque value quietly, mine as he hit it, not for the audience, for himself. Confirmation, verification, 3 points of certainty per installation, the way Eli Rourke had taught him. At 5:47 in the morning, Caleb tightened the final fastener. He held the torque wrench in place for a 3 count, released it, set it down. He didn't move for almost 10 seconds. He was crouched in front of the engine, looking at his work, doing a final internal check against everything in his memory, in his notebook, in his father's voice. Then he stood up. He looked at Grizzly. "It's done," he said. The garage absorbed those 2 words. Grizzly walked forward until he was standing directly in front of the Black Seraph. He put his hand on the tank the way he had the morning before when everything had been broken and he hadn't known it could be fixed. "Test run," he said. "Yes, sir." "When it now," Caleb said. "It's ready now." Grizzly looked at him, looked at the bike, looked at the men around him, Tick, Dozer, 2 others who had stayed through the night, and made a decision that only the president of a brotherhood can make. "Open the main doors," he said. Dozer moved. The main garage doors rolled open. The early Nevada morning came in cold and gray and smelling of desert. Grizzly stepped back. Caleb approached the Black Seraph. He stood in front of it for a moment, and the men watching him would later agree that this moment, just this one before anything happened, was already something. The boy in the machine, the son and the father's masterwork. The end of a journey that had started in a 12-year-old's grief and traveled through 6 years of study and 1 long night of work and 3 titanium capsules marked with an R. Caleb checked the fuel, the ignition connection, the choke position. He mounted the bike. The garage was completely silent. He put his hand on the starter, and from somewhere behind him, from outside the open doors, where the sound had apparently carried into the pre-dawn compound, there was the sound of boots on gravel. Multiple sets, men waking up hearing that the doors were open, feeling the specific pull of something significant about to happen. By the time Caleb's thumb moved to the starter button, there were 14 people in and around that garage. Nobody had been called. They had just come. He pressed it. The Black Seraph's engine turned over. Once, twice. And then it caught, and the sound that came out of that machine was not what anyone had been expecting, because they had all heard it start before. 73 times they'd heard it start. The clean, perfect opening rumble. They knew that sound. They were prepared for that sound. What they were not prepared for was what came after it, because every other time the count had started immediately. The knowledge of the 17 seconds had lived in the room like a held breath. 1 second, 5, 10, 14. But this time the engine settled into a rhythm that was deep and even and astonishingly, almost frighteningly perfect. Not the sound of an engine warming up. The sound of an engine that had arrived. That was exactly where it was supposed to be. 17 seconds came and went. Nobody breathed. 18, 19, 20, 30. The engine ran, clean and powerful and without a single tremor of the catastrophic failure that had defined it for 3 years. It ran the way Eli Rourke had designed it to run, which was unlike anything any of them had heard before, because Eli Rourke had been operating at a level that still, even now, with the proof idling in front of them, seemed impossible. Caleb sat on the Black Seraph and he let it run. His hands were on the grips and his eyes were closed and he was listening. And every single person watching him understood without being told what he was hearing. He was hearing his father. 1 minute passed, 2, 3. The engine didn't stutter, didn't protest, didn't give anyone a reason to doubt. Grizzly Kane, who did not cry, who had not cried at 11 funerals through 2 wars, through everything the world had done to him and the people he loved, stood 10 feet from the Black Seraph with his fist pressed to his mouth and his eyes doing something that his face was working very hard to contain. He was not entirely succeeding. Behind him, Dutch had come in. He was standing at the edge of the garage, and he was not saying anything, and his arms were not crossed. Crowbar was there too. Vince Maddox, who had gone away to sit alone with 11 years of wrong weight, had apparently come back. He was standing in the doorway, and his face was the face of a man for whom something that has been broken for a very long time has just not healed, exactly because some things don't heal that simply, but been given the first real chance at it. Caleb opened his eyes. He looked at Grizzly. Grizzly lowered his fist from his mouth. He straightened to his full height. He breathed once, long and slow. "Your father," he said, and his voice was rough in a way that he didn't try to smooth out, "built one hell of a machine." Caleb looked at him for a moment, then down at the tank. Then for the first time since he'd walked through the gate, a real expression moved across his face, not controlled, not performed. Real. Something between grief and pride and gratitude and the particular sorrow of loving someone who isn't there to see the thing they built still work. "Yeah," he said quietly. He let the engine run. He let the engine run for 4 full minutes before he shut it down. Not because 4 minutes was the required test duration, because he needed to hear it. All of it. Every second of sustained, perfect, impossible operation. He needed it in his body the way you need certain things, not as data, not as confirmation, but as something that fills a specific hollow that has existed in you for years, and that you didn't fully understand was hollow until the moment something warm moved into it. When he finally cut the engine, the silence that followed was different from every other silence the compound had produced in the last 24 hours. Those silences had been tense-loaded waiting. This one was full, the way a room feels full after the right people have said the right things, like the air itself had been changed by what had passed through it. Nobody spoke for almost 30 seconds. Then Grizzly turned to the men behind him, to Dutch, to Tick, to Dozer, to the 14 people who had gathered at the edges of the garage, and he did something that required no words because the Iron Brotherhood had a language for moments like this. He looked at each of them in turn with the full weight of who he was and what this meant. Dutch was the first one to respond. He pushed off the wall he'd been leaning against and walked forward until he was standing next to Grizzly, looking at the Black Seraph, looking at the boy still sitting on it. "All right," Dutch said, "one word." But in the vocabulary of a man like Dutch, who had come in hostile and stayed to witness everything and was now standing here choosing this, that one word carried an entire position change, a concession, an acknowledgement, the kind of thing that costs something real. Grizzly looked at him. "All right," Dutch said again, quieter. "I was wrong." Grizzly put a hand on his shoulder briefly, just briefly. Caleb climbed off the bike. His legs were slightly unsteady when he hit the ground, not dramatically, just a small physical announcement that he had been running on adrenaline and purpose for the last several hours, and the body was beginning to present its invoice. He put one hand on the tank to steady himself, and the gesture was so natural and so unconscious that several people watching it felt something they couldn't name precisely, which was the recognition that this boy was not treating the Black Seraph as a machine he'd fixed. He was treating it as something he had a relationship with, something inherited. Dozer appeared at his elbow with a paper cup of coffee. "Drink this," he said. Caleb took it without argument and drank half of it in one long pull. "When did you last sleep?" Dozer asked. Caleb thought about it. "Day before yesterday, I think." "You think?" "I was driving, then I was walking." He drank the rest of the coffee. "I'll sleep after the ride." "The ride's in..." Dozer checked his watch. 2 days. "Then I'll sleep in 2 days." Dozer looked at him with the expression of a man who has raised children or younger brothers and recognizes the specific brand of stubborn that cannot be argued with because it comes from somewhere too deep to reach by logic. "You'll sleep tonight," he said. "There's a bunk in the East Hall. We'll put you there." Caleb started to protest. "The bike is done," Dozer said. "It runs. You've done what you came to do. The rest of tonight, you sleep." He paused. "Your father would say the same thing. A mechanic who doesn't rest makes mistakes on the final check." Caleb closed his mouth, looked at the Black Seraph, then nodded once. But before he moved toward the door, Grizzly was in front of him. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the brass key, the one Caleb had handed him hours ago with 3 words taped to it in Eli Rourke's handwriting. He held it in the space between them. "I want you with me when I open it," Grizzly said. Caleb looked at the key. "Now, I want you." Now, Caleb looked at his watch. It was just past 6 in the morning. "Okay," he said. They walked to the south wall together. Grizzly, Caleb, Dozer, and Tick, who fell in behind them because Tick fell in behind Grizzly, the way a certain kind of loyal man moves with a certain kind of leader by habit and by choice simultaneously. The rest of the compound was beginning to stir around them, the early risers moving through the grounds, word spreading the way. Word always spread in a place like this, person to person, quietly, with the particular weight of news that people are still processing. The storage unit was a solid metal structure built against the compound's south perimeter wall, integrated into it so well that you'd miss it if you didn't know to look. A combination padlock and a keyed deadbolt. The padlock had been cut years ago. Grizzly mentioned this without inflection, the way you mention something that happened during a period of confusion and grief. The deadbolt had stayed locked. The key had never existed as far as anyone knew. Until now. Grizzly put the key in the deadbolt. It turned cleanly. First try. After 6 years, the mechanism was smooth as though it had been maintained, or as though Eli Rourke had simply built it to last. The door opened. What was inside stopped all 4 of them in the doorway. Not because of what it was, because of how much of it there was and what it represented and what it said about the mind of the man who had put it there. Shelves, floor to ceiling, organized with the same precise systematic methodology that Caleb recognized from the notebooks, from the way his father arranged information and tools and components. Every shelf labeled, every container documented, and on the central table, laid flat in a protective case, were technical drawings. Schematics, complete detailed cross-referenced engineering documents for systems and designs that none of them immediately recognized. Grizzly picked up the top document and looked at it. He turned it once, twice. "What is this?" he said. Caleb was already at the shelves reading labels, his hand moving along rows of documented components with a recognition that nobody else in the room could share. "These are his archives," Caleb said. "Everything he built, everything he designed, every custom component, every proprietary specification." He stopped at one shelf and stood very still. "Grizzly." "What?" Caleb turned with a component housing in his hand, custom machined, labeled in Eli's hand with a date from 4 years ago. 4 years ago, 2 years after he disappeared. "This was added after he left," Caleb said. "He came back. At some point, he came back and he added to this." The room went very quiet. "He was here," Grizzly said, very slowly. "He was here," Caleb confirmed, "after he disappeared. He came back at least once, maybe more, and he added to the archive. He set the component down carefully. He didn't abandon you. He couldn't come back fully, but he couldn't stay away completely either." Grizzly sat down on the edge of the central table. He sat down the same way he'd sat down on the stool in the garage, not from weakness, but from the specific weight of a realization that requires you to recalibrate your understanding of everything that came before it. For 6 years, the story of Eli Rourke had been a story of abandonment. That was the narrative. That was what Grizzly had been living with underneath everything else, under the blame and the grief and the fractured alliances. The knowledge, or what he'd believed was knowledge, that his oldest friend had chosen to leave and had not looked back. And now he was sitting in a room that proved the opposite. The man had come back, had maintained this place, had kept contributing to something even when he couldn't be here to see it. "Where is he now?" Grizzly said. He wasn't asking any of them. He was asking the room, the shelves, the archived remnants of a man's work and loyalty. Nobody answered because nobody knew. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "The letter mentioned a location just once, in the part that was mine." He paused. "I don't know if it's current." Grizzly looked at him. "Will you tell me?" Caleb met his eyes. "After the ride," he said. "That's what the letter said. Finish the ride first. Then there's a next step." Grizzly held his gaze for a long time. Then he stood up. "After the ride," he agreed. They sealed the unit back up. Grizzly kept the key. The walk back to the main building was quieter than the walk out, which was saying something. Tick and Dozer dropped back half a step without discussing it, giving Grizzly and Caleb the front, because people with good instincts recognize when two people are in the middle of something. Did he explain, Grizzly said, not looking at Caleb, in the letter? Did he explain why he couldn't just tell someone reach out, give you a phone number? He explained, Caleb said. Some of it I understood. Some of it I'm still working through. He walked 3 more steps. He said the people he needed to stay away from were the same people who would use the Brotherhood to find him. He said he couldn't put you in the position of knowing where he was because then you'd have to either protect him or report him, and he wasn't willing to make that your problem. He made it my problem for 6 years, Grizzly said. He made the absence your problem. He thought that was smaller. Caleb glanced at him. I think he was wrong about that. Grizzly made a sound that was not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. Yeah, he said, he was wrong about that. They had just reached the main building entrance when the morning went wrong. It happened fast the way things go wrong in places like this, not with warning, but with the sudden collapse of the space between normal and not. A shout from the direction of the garage, then running footsteps. Then Dozer's phone ringing and Dozer answering it and listening for 3 seconds and looking at Grizzly. The bike, Dozer said. Grizzly was already moving. They covered the distance back to the garage in under a minute. By the time they got there, 3 Brotherhood members were standing around the Black Seraph in defensive positions, not because they knew what they were defending against, but because their instincts had fired and their bodies had responded. The bike was upright, intact, not touched. But on the seat laid there, deliberately placed with the specific intention of being found, was a wrench. Old worn, the kind that had been used for years, and attached to it with a zip tie was a folded piece of paper. Grizzly picked up the paper. He unfolded it, read it. His expression during the reading was absolutely neutral in the deliberate, trained way that means the inside of the person is not neutral at all. He folded it back up. Who found this? He said. One of the 3 men raised his hand, came in to check on the bike after the test run. Found it on the seat. Nobody was in here between the test run and now. Not that I saw. I was outside the whole time. Grizzly looked at the wrench, at the paper, at the faces around him. What does it say? Tick asked. Grizzly looked at him, then at Caleb. Then he made a decision and read it aloud. The boy doesn't belong here. The bike should stay silent. Some things are buried for a reason. This is your last warning. The garage absorbed it. Last warning, Dutch said. He'd come in behind them. His voice was flat and hard, meaning there were previous warnings we didn't know about. The machine shop, Dozer said immediately. That was the first one. Someone damaged the machine shop equipment and didn't get the result they wanted because Caleb already had the component, Tick said. He looked at the wrench. So they escalated. Grizzly set the paper down on the workbench. Someone inside this compound, he said, and his voice had taken on the specific quality that everyone in the room recognized as Grizzly Kane at the edge of something, has been trying to stop this. Before the capsules were opened, before we knew what was in them. He looked around the room. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately reading every face, which means they already knew what was in them. The silence that followed had a different quality than any of the previous silences. This one had suspicion in it. Caleb spoke before anyone else could. How many people knew about the design of this bike, he said. Specifically the internal design, the frame cavities. Not just that Eli built it, who knew the specifics of how it was constructed. Eli didn't share the technical details with anyone, Grizzly said. Then whoever wrote this note either guessed or... Caleb stopped. He was looking at the wrench. He picked it up and turned it over, studying it. This is an Eli Rourke tool, he said. How would you know that? Dutch said. Because my father stamped every significant tool he owned. Right here on the handle shank. Caleb held it up. A small, precise stamp on the metal. 2 letters. ER. Someone in this compound has one of my father's tools. A tool from his personal collection. He looked at Grizzly. Was Eli's equipment distributed after he disappeared? Grizzly's expression hardened. Some of it, his shop tools, were divided among members. He owed some favors. It was how things were handled. Who got his personal tools? His hand tools. Grizzly was quiet. Grizzly, Tick said carefully. I remember, Grizzly said. He looked at Caleb. I remember who got his personal tool collection. He didn't say the name out loud. He didn't need to. What he did instead was look at Dozer with the specific directness of a man communicating in a code that has been established over years. Dozer's face changed. "You're sure? Check it," Grizzly said. Dozer left the garage. He came back 11 minutes later. His expression when he returned confirmed what everyone was now afraid to confirm. "He's not in his bunk," Dozer said. "He's not in the common room, the yard, the kitchen. His bike is still here, but I can't find him in the compound." Grizzly said the name then, quietly, like the word itself was something he'd been hoping not to have to say. "Harlan." He said it the way you say the name of someone you trust. You trusted so long and so completely that even the evidence in your hand doesn't make the betrayal immediately real. Harlan Reed, 15 years in the Brotherhood, treasurer, the man who handled the finances and the logistics and the details that kept the compound operational. The man who had quietly and without drama inherited Eli Rourke's personal tool collection 6 years ago. The man who had been present at the gate that morning when Caleb arrived. Grizzly remembered it, now remembered Harlan standing at the back of the small crowd, face unreadable. Who had known something was happening before anyone explained it to him? Tick said it carefully. "Why would Harlan want to stop this?" "Because the medical record," Caleb said, not loudly, not with accusation, simply as a person working through logic. "The medical record about Tommy Maddox. If it came out, Crowbar would be cleared," Dozer said. "And if Crowbar was cleared," Tick started. "Crowbar's been running secondary finances through Harlan for 11 years, Grizzly said. His voice was very quiet and very hard. "Harlan has managed accounts under Crowbar's authority that Crowbar signed off on without scrutiny because Crowbar was too consumed by grief and guilt to look closely at the details." He stopped. "If Crowbar gets his clarity back, if the weight comes off him, he starts looking at things he hasn't looked at." The room absorbed the full shape of it. Harlan Reed had built himself a comfortable position in the shadow of Vince Maddox's grief. 11 years of financial control under the cover of a man whose guilt kept him distracted. The revelation of Tommy's medical record didn't just clear Eli Rourke. It gave Crowbar back his full attention, his sharpness, his authority, which meant everything Harlan had been doing in that shadow was suddenly at risk of scrutiny. "He damaged the machine shop to buy time," Tick said. "He left the note to scare the kid off. He was trying to prevent the capsules from being opened." "He knew about the capsules," Caleb said. Something moved across his face. "He knew about the frame design," which means he stopped. His jaw tightened slightly. "Which means at some point my father told him, or showed him, or Harlan found access to something he shouldn't have had access to." Grizzly looked at the wrench in Caleb's hand. "Or he found the storage unit." "The deadbolt was intact," Caleb said. "He didn't have the key." "He might not have needed it for everything," Grizzly said. "A determined man with 15 years in this compound and access to the finances finds ways to know things." Dozer had his phone out. "I'll put out—" "No," Grizzly said. Dozer looked up. "Not yet. I don't want this to become something it doesn't need to become inside the compound. Not 2 days before the ride. Not with 700 people coming." Grizzly looked at each of them in turn. "We find him ourselves, quietly, and we have a conversation." Nobody argued, because that was how things were handled here. Not with calls and warrants and public spectacles. With the specific contained accountability of men who govern themselves according to their own code, and who took that code seriously in both directions, extending it when it was earned, and enforcing it when it was violated. Dutch said quietly but with full weight, "What do you need from me?" Grizzly looked at him. Something passed between them, the specific acknowledgement between men who have been on opposite sides of something and have chosen to realign without making a ceremony of it. "Keep the morning normal," Grizzly said. "Compound wakes up, breakfast, happens, the bike is there, and running, and the news moves through the membership the way good news should. Nobody hears the word Harlan from anyone in this garage. Can you do that?" "Yes," Dutch said. "Then do it." Dutch walked out. This time he didn't look back. Grizzly turned to Caleb. "Go sleep," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the voice of a man who has taken on responsibility for the welfare of someone in his compound and is exercising that responsibility. "Dozer will take you to the East Hall. When you wake up, come find me." Caleb looked at the Black Seraph one more time, then at Grizzly. "What about Harlan?" "That's not your problem," Grizzly said, and then more gently, You fixed the bike. You delivered what your father sent you to deliver. What comes next is brotherhood business, and you've earned the right to not be involved in it. He paused. Let me handle my house. Caleb nodded. He picked up his backpack from the corner where he'd left it, still with the notebook inside, still with his father's folded letter in his shirt pocket, and followed Dozer out. The East Hall was quiet. The bunk Dozer pointed him to was simple mattress pillow, a blanket that had been washed enough times to become genuinely soft. Caleb sat on the edge of it and took the letter from his pocket. He didn't unfold it again. He just held it. He thought about his father building this. Not just the bike, the whole system. The capsules, the key, the storage unit, the notebooks. The years of preparation for a conversation that couldn't happen in person. The particular loneliness of that engineering your love into objects because you can't be present to speak it directly. He thought about his father coming back to the storage unit in the night, adding components, maintaining his archive, staying connected to this place and these people the only way he safely could. He thought about Grizzly's face when he heard the engine run. He put the letter back in his pocket and lay down. He was asleep inside 4 minutes. He woke up to the sound of voices, not alarmed, not the sharp voices of crisis, but the specific multiple conversation sound of a compound that has received significant news and is processing it collectively. Through the wall, through the compound, the sound of the brotherhood absorbing what the morning had delivered. The bike ran. He could hear it in the quality of the voices, even without making out the words. There's a specific register to human voices when they're communicating something that has changed the weight of a day, and that was what he was hearing through the wall of the East Hall bunk room. He checked his watch. He'd slept 3 hours and 40 minutes, not enough by any objective measure, enough by the measure of what today required. He splashed water on his face, put on his jacket, and went to find Grizzly. He found him in the main common room, not alone. Crowbar was there. Vince Maddox was sitting at a table across from Grizzly, and they were talking with the specific, careful intensity of two men who have known each other for a very long time and are renegotiating the terms of that knowledge in real time. Caleb stopped in the doorway. Grizzly saw him and gave a small nod, the kind that means stay. He stayed. What he was witnessing was not a reconciliation in the movie sense. It was more complicated and more real than that. Crowbar was asking questions about Harlan, not with the fire of a man who had just discovered a betrayal, but with the measured, painful attention of someone who is only now realizing the shape of the container his grief had become and what someone else had been storing inside it. How long, Barbar? Crowbar said. We don't know exactly, Grizzly said. Dozer is going through the accounts now. Early reading is at least 7 years. Crowbar put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a long time. I let it happen, he said. You didn't know. I didn't look, Crowbar said, because looking meant thinking clearly, and thinking clearly meant facing things I didn't want to face. He lifted his eyes. Tommy's choice, your friend being innocent, the fact that I spent 11 years burning down something that didn't deserve to be burned. He stopped. He was doing the same thing he'd done in the garage, holding something enormous very tightly and trying to maintain the structural integrity of the container. Vince, Grizzly said. Don't, Crowbar said, not aggressively, tiredly. Don't tell me it's okay. It's not okay. It happened. Tommy made his choice, and I made mine, and neither of us can take those back. He glanced toward the doorway, toward Caleb, then back at Grizzly. But the kid, what happens to the kid? What do you mean? He fixed the bike. He delivered everything his father sent him to deliver. And now what? He walks back out the gate. Crowbar looked at his hands again. Eli Rourke's son walks out of here with nothing. Grizzly was quiet. Caleb stepped fully into the doorway. I didn't come here for anything, he said. Both men looked at him. I came because I was supposed to, because my father prepared me to, because the ride mattered and the brotherhood mattered, and he stopped. Let the next part come from somewhere honest. Because I wanted to see the thing he built work the way he meant it to. Crowbar looked at him for a long moment. Then he said bluntly and without decoration, you look like him, around the eyes. People keep saying that, Caleb said. It's true. Crowbar stood up. He was a large man and the standing was deliberate, the act of a man who has decided something. He crossed the room and stood in front of Caleb, and he put out his hand. Caleb shook it. Crowbar held the handshake for a moment longer than a standard handshake. Then he let go and walked out of the common room without another word, with the particular dignity of a man who is carrying more than he can talk about and is choosing to carry it quietly. Grizzly watched him go. Then he looked at Caleb. Harlan turned up, he said. Caleb waited. Compound's north fence. He was trying to leave on foot. Grizzly's expression was entirely neutral in the deliberate way again. He's being spoken to. Is he? He'll be fine, Grizzly said. He's being spoken to, and then he'll be leaving the Brotherhood, and that will be the end of it. We handle our house. Caleb nodded. Grizzly stood up from the table. He was quiet for a moment in a way that suggested he was choosing his next words carefully, which was not something Grizzly Kane usually needed to do. I want to offer you something, he said. As a transaction, not as payment for what you did, as an acknowledgement of who you are and who your father was to this Brotherhood. Caleb was still. If you want it, Grizzly said, there's a place here for you, not a favor, not charity, a proper place with proper standing, earned by what I've watched you do in the last 24 hours. He held Caleb's gaze. Your father was Brotherhood. That doesn't expire. And you're already more of what this club is supposed to be than half the men on my roster. The room held the offer. Caleb looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked up, something in his expression was working through several layers simultaneously. I need to find him first, he said. My father. Whatever the letter says, whatever the next step is, I need to find him before I decide where I'm going to be. He paused. But I want you to know that the offer means something to me. It means something I can't fully say right now. Grizzly nodded. Find him, he said. And when you do, he stopped. Tell him I still have his back. Whatever comes next, tell him that. Caleb put his hand over the pocket where the letter was. I will, he said. Outside the common room, the compound was fully awake now, and the news had traveled, as news does, through the bone structure of the Brotherhood, person to person, hand to hand. The Black Seraph ran. Eli Rourke's son had fixed it. The Remembrance ride was 2 days away, and the machine that was meant to lead it was alive and waiting. 700 bikers were coming. Families were making their way toward the compound from 3 states. And somewhere in Nevada or beyond it, a man named Eli Rourke was either watching from a safe distance or had no idea what his son had just done with the 20 years of preparation he'd been handed. Either way, something was coming toward its conclusion. And the Black Seraph was ready. The morning of the Remembrance ride came in the way that important mornings always do not, with fanfare but with a specific quality of light and air and collective human breath that tells everyone present that something is about to happen that will be measured against for years. Caleb woke up before anyone called him. His body knew. He lay still for exactly 3 seconds after his eyes opened, staring at the ceiling of the East Hall bunk room, and in those 3 seconds, the entire weight of what day it was settled onto his chest with a pressure that was equal parts dread and purpose. Then he got up. He dressed carefully, not slowly carefully. The distinction mattered. He put on the clothes he'd arrived in because they were the only clothes he had, and he straightened them with the particular attention of someone who understands that what you wear into a moment is part of what you bring to it. He took the letter from where he'd kept it in his shirt pocket through the night, unfolded it one more time, read the last 3 lines, folded it back, returned it to his pocket. He walked out into the compound. What he walked into was 700 people, in various states of preparation, and the specific charged energy of a gathering that has waited long enough to have become something larger than its original intention. People everywhere, Brotherhood members from chapters he'd never heard of, families, wives, children, parents of members long gone who had driven or flown from distances that spoke to what this day meant. The compound that had felt contained and purposeful in the tight hours of the previous night now felt like a living thing breathing in deep. Grizzly found him before he'd taken 20 steps. How'd you sleep? Grizzly said. Well enough, Caleb said. Grizzly looked at him the way he'd been looking at him since the first morning, that direct reading assessment that missed nothing. You ready for this? I fixed the bike, Caleb said. The bike is ready. That's what I came to do. That's not what I asked. Caleb looked at him, then at the compound around him, at the 700 people, at the families, at the bikes lined up in a column that stretched longer than he could see from where he stood, at the Iron Brotherhood alive and assembled and about to move. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. Grizzly put a hand on his shoulder briefly. The same gesture as before. Brief, deliberate, heavy with things that weren't being put into words because the words would have been inadequate. Come with me, he said. The main garage doors were open. The black seraph sat in the center of the open space, and around it, with the specific involuntary deference that people give to objects they've assigned significance to, everyone had left a clear radius. Nobody had been asked to do this. It had just happened. The way a congregation makes space around an altar without being told. Caleb walked to it. He ran one hand along the tank, the same gesture Grizzly had made the day before. The same gesture the man had made in grief and desperation before Caleb had arrived. But where Grizzly's gesture had been a man saying goodbye to something he thought was lost, Caleb's was a man completing a circuit, a closing of something that had been open for 6 years. He could feel people watching him, not invasively with the same quality of witness that had existed in the garage through the night. These people understood in the way that groups understand things collectively, without individual discussion, that what they were watching was the last act of something. Tick appeared at his elbow. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You know how to ride?" "My father taught me," Caleb said. "Of course he did," Tick said, and there was no sarcasm in it, just the specific weathered affection of a man who has revised his opinion of someone and is no longer embarrassed to show it. Dozer came through the crowd carrying something draped over his arm, a cut, a vest, old leather well kept with the Iron Brotherhood patch on the back and something else on the front that Caleb couldn't read until Dozer held it out and he saw it. A patch, right chest, 3 letters, ELI. It was his, Dozer said simply. Grizzly had it in the South Unit. He wore it for the last remembrance ride he was here for. He held it out. "Grizzly wants you to wear it today." Caleb looked at the cut, his father's cut, the leather still holding the shape of a man's shoulders after 6 years in a storage unit, still carrying the smell of road and work and the specific lived-in quality of something that had been worn with commitment. His hands weren't entirely steady when he took it. He didn't try to hide that. He just let his hands not be steady, and he put the cut on, and he straightened it, and he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't have been smaller than the moment. From somewhere in the crowd, a woman's voice, older, rough with emotion, said quietly, "Lord." Just that one word. And nobody laughed because everyone understood exactly what she meant. Grizzly walked to the front of the garage. When he turned to face the compound, the crowd quieted without being asked. This was something else the Brotherhood had built over decades, the instinct to listen when Grizzly Kane turned to face them. He looked at them for a long moment before he spoke. 3 years ago, he said, "We were going to lead this ride on the Black Seraph. Eli Rourke built that machine for this Brotherhood and for this ride, and we couldn't make it work. And we tried." His voice was level and real and carried no performance. "God knows we tried." He paused. "I want to tell you what happened in this garage over the last 48 hours because you deserve to know. Every one of you," he told them. Not everything, not the specifics of Harlan, not the financial details that were still being untangled, but everything that mattered. The capsules, the letter, the medical record, the bearing assemblies, the 17 seconds that finally became 18-19-20-30. He told it plainly and without decoration, and the crowd absorbed every word with the specific stillness of people receiving something they didn't know they needed. When he got to the part about Vince Maddox, about Crowbar, he stopped and looked directly at the man who was standing at the edge of the crowd with the particular posture of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has only just been given permission to set it down. 11 years, Grizzly said. 11 years Vince carried something that wasn't his to carry. The truth was always there. It just took Eli Rourke's engineering in his son's hands to bring it into the light. He held Crowbar's eyes. That's done now. And Eli was Brotherhood. He was Brotherhood every single day of the last 6 years. He just couldn't be here to prove it. Crowbar looked at the ground. His jaw worked. He didn't speak, but his right hand came up and pressed briefly against his chest, a gesture so private and so instinctive that several people looked away to give it room. Grizzly turned back to the group. "We lead today with the Black Seraph," he said, "the way it was always meant to happen. And leading it," he looked at Caleb, "is the man who made it possible." The sound that moved through 700 people was not applause exactly. It was more collective than that, more physical. The sound of a large group of humans reaching simultaneously for something, a release of something, held for too long. It went through the crowd like a wave through water, fast total, impossible to stop once it started. Caleb stood next to the Black Seraph in his father's cut and felt the sound move through him and did not perform a response to it. He let it land, let it be what it was. His eyes were bright in a way he wasn't going to apologize for, and his jaw was set in a way that said he was holding himself together with the specific determination of someone who has promised himself he will not come apart publicly and means to keep that promise. He almost kept it. What broke him just slightly, just at the edges, was Crowbar. Vince Maddox walked through the crowd, which parted for him without thinking, and he walked up to Caleb and he stood in front of him. He was a large man who had been made larger by grief and now somehow looked both smaller and more real without it. He looked at Caleb in his father's cut and he said nothing for a moment. Then, "Your father saved my brother's reputation too, you know. The medical record, it means Tommy's death wasn't reckless, wasn't stupid. It was his own private pain, and that's what it should have always been called. Not an accident caused by someone else's failure." His voice was rough, and it stayed rough. "Eli protected my brother's dignity even when I was blaming him for my brother's death. That's..." He stopped. "That's the kind of man your father is. Is. Present tense. Deliberate." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Yeah," he said, "it is." Crowbar put out his hand again. Caleb took it, and this time the handshake was different from the one in the common room. It was the handshake of two people who have arrived at something together, rather than two people trying to communicate across a distance. The column formed. 700 motorcycles arranged themselves with the specific experienced efficiency of a group that has done this before and knows the weight of it. Family members lined up along the route outside the gates, some of them holding photographs, some of them holding nothing because their hands were full of something invisible that didn't need to be held to be real. Caleb mounted the Black Seraph. He adjusted his grip on the handlebars, felt the weight of the machine under him, the specific, substantial, completely present weight of something real. Something built by someone who had understood that objects carry meaning and had engineered that understanding into every weld and tolerance and hidden capsule. Grizzly came to stand beside him, not on a bike, just standing. He looked up at Caleb with an expression that had nothing managed about it. "Your father didn't just build a bike," he said. His voice was low just for Caleb. "He built a legacy. He built a test. He built a delivery system for truth that nothing could corrupt or destroy or bury. He put one hand on the Black Seraph's tank one final time, and he built a way to send his son home." Caleb looked at him. "I want you to know something," Grizzly said. "Whatever happens next, wherever you go after today, this compound is your home. Not because of the cut, not because of the bike, not because of what you did here." He looked Caleb in the eye with everything he had. "Because you're Eli Rourke's kid, and Eli Rourke's kid has a home here for as long as he wants one." Caleb breathed once, slowly. "Thank you," he said, and then because it needed to be said directly, "He was right about you. Everything he told me about you. He was right." Grizzly's expression did the thing it had done when the engine ran. The thing he almost controlled, almost held back, almost kept entirely private. He nodded once. He stepped back. Caleb looked forward, at the open gates, at the road beyond them, at 700 bikes ready to move, and 700 people carrying their losses and their loyalty and their love into a Nevada morning that was clear and cold and exactly right for what was happening in it. He put his thumb on the starter. One breath. The engine fired on the first push. Clean, immediate, certain. The sound of it rolled out through the open gates and into the morning air. And everyone who heard it, every family member lining the road, every Brotherhood member behind him, every person who had been told the story of 3 years and 17 seconds and 73 failures, every single one of them felt it somewhere below thought. In the chest, in the throat, in the specific place where grief and relief live right next to each other with no wall between them. 17 seconds. Caleb sat perfectly still. The engine ran. 18, 19, 20, nobody breathed. 30 seconds. 40. A full minute of the Black Seraph doing exactly what Eli Rourke had designed it to do, running with the specificity and power of something that had been waiting years for the conditions to be right, and had found them at last. The sound didn't change, didn't waver, didn't give anyone a reason to doubt. It simply ran. And then from somewhere in the column behind him, from one of those 700 people who had been holding their breath, someone exhaled, loudly, the sound of a human body releasing pressure it had been holding past its limit. And that one exhale opened a door, because then there were others, and then voices, and then something that wasn't quite a cheer because it was too personal for that, too individual, too much about specific private loss and specific private relief to be categorized as crowd noise. Men who had buried brothers, who had come here carrying photographs and memories, and the specific weight of absence made sounds that had nothing to do with performance. They made the sounds that people make when something they'd stopped expecting to happen finally happens, and the body doesn't know what to do with the surplus of feeling except release it into the air. Caleb didn't look back. He looked at the road ahead, and he felt the engine through the handlebars and the seat and the soles of his boots, and he understood with the full clarity of a person standing at the intersection of everything a life has prepared them for, that this was what his father had been working toward. Not the bike, not the capsules, not even the truth about Tommy Maddox. This moment. His son on this machine in this place, leading these people forward. The full completed circuit of a love that had refused to be interrupted by distance or time or the impossibility of direct communication. A father who had said everything he needed to say in notebooks, in engineering drawings, in 3 titanium capsules marked with the letter R, and had trusted completely that his son would know how to read it. Caleb reached into his shirt pocket with 2 fingers and touched the letter without removing it. "I'm here," he said, not out loud, not in words exactly, but in the specific private language of a person speaking to someone they can't see. "I'm here. I found it all. I did it." He gave the engine gentle throttle. The black Seraph moved forward. Behind him, in perfect sequence, 700 motorcycles came to life. The sound of them building behind him like something geological, like the earth itself deciding to move. And the column followed Eli Rourke's machine out of the gates of the Iron Brotherhood compound and onto the Nevada highway. Family members on the roadside held up their photographs as he passed. An older woman, gray-haired small, standing very straight, held up a framed picture of a young man in Brotherhood colors and looked directly at Caleb as he rode by. And whatever she saw in him, in his face and the cut he was wearing, made her press the photograph to her chest and close her eyes. He didn't know who her son had been. He didn't need to. He understood the language. Tick was 4 bikes back and could see Caleb's shoulders and the back of the cut, Eli's cut, and the way the kid sat that machine. And he said to Dozer, riding beside him over the engine noise, just loudly enough to be heard, he was always going to show up. Eli raised him exactly right. Dozer didn't respond because he couldn't not without his voice doing something he wasn't prepared to manage on a public highway. He just nodded and kept riding. Grizzly was last out of the gate. He paused there for a moment, just one moment, just long enough, and looked at the compound behind him. At the garage with its doors still open. At the south wall where the storage unit held 6 years of a man's continued loyalty. At the workbench inside where 3 empty titanium capsules sat with their secrets delivered at last. He thought about a key with 3 words taped to it. South wall, everything. He thought about a man who had loved this brotherhood enough to spend 6 years proving it from the outside. He reached into his shirt pocket and closed his fist around the brass key one more time. Then he opened his hand and looked at it. Then he put it back. "Some things you keep," he wrote out. The column moved through the Nevada morning with the specific, irreversible momentum of something that has finally become what it was always meant to be. Not a gathering of people managing grief, but a brotherhood in full motion, carrying its losses the way healthy things carry weight, not as a burden, but as ballast, as the thing that keeps you from floating away from what matters. At the front of it all on a machine that had been impossible for 3 years and was now exactly what its maker intended, Caleb Rourke rode with his father's letter over his heart and his father's cut on his shoulders and his father's engine between his hands. The black Seraph didn't scream. It roared clean and powerful and permanent, the sound of something built. Right? Finally running. Right? Finally doing exactly what the man who made it designed it to do. Finally carrying forward the weight of everything it was meant to carry. Some machines are just machines, and some are the last thing a father says to his son when words aren't possible, built in steel and titanium, and 20 years of love sent forward through time on the faith that the right hands would find it. Eli Rourke had known exactly whose hands those would be. He'd been right.